I was hiking alone in late autumn, on a short trail I had done so many times over the years that I could almost walk it with my eyes closed. It was the kind of trail I usually used when I wanted to clear my head without dealing with crowds. Most people avoided it past early fall because the air turned sharp, the daylight felt shorter, and the trees made the whole place look colder than it actually was. But for me, this was the perfect time to hike. The leaves were already turning brown and curling inward. The ground was soft with layers of fallen ones, and the entire forest felt still in a way I always found calming. I parked my car near the small gravel lot around noon. The sky was gray but stable. No rain, just those heavy autumn clouds that seemed to hang low between the branches. I grabbed my small backpack, tightened the straps, and started walking. The trail was narrow, twisting between tall pines and bare oak trees. I could hear the crunch of leaves under my shoes with every step, and the faint distant sound of wind pushing through the higher branches. For the first 10 minutes, everything felt normal. I wasn't rushing, just letting my legs warm up and my breathing settle. I passed the old split tree stump on the left, then the fallen log that always looked like it would completely block the trail but somehow never did. These were landmarks I had seen dozens of times. Nothing ever changed out there, but halfway in, something felt different. I didn't notice anything at first. It was just this faint feeling that the air around me had shifted. It wasn't colder, just heavier, quieter. Even the wind seemed to slow down. Usually I heard squirrels or birds somewhere nearby, but instead it was so silent that it actually made me stop walking for a moment. I listened, expecting some normal forest sound to break the tension, but nothing did. I kept walking, trying not to overthink it. When I rounded a slight curve in the trail, that's when I saw her. There was a woman standing behind a tree a few meters ahead of me. Only half of her body was visible, like she was leaning out from behind the trunk just enough for me to see her shoulder, arm, and part of her face. She stood completely still. I mean completely, not even a shift of weight, not even that tiny movement you see when someone breathes. Her clothes looked plain. A dark jacket, maybe dark pants, nothing strange or dramatic. What bothered me wasn't how she looked, but how she positioned herself. It was like she had been waiting for me to walk into view, like she wanted me to notice her, but she didn't want to step out in the open either. At first I thought maybe she was hiking too and was just taking a break behind the tree. But the more I stared, the more something felt wrong. Most people would step aside, nod, wave, or at least show some sign that they saw me. She didn't do anything, not even a shift of her eyes. She just stared in my direction with that half-hidden body, like she was trying to study me without fully showing herself. My chest tightened. I forced myself to look calm, even though my stomach felt like it was slowly sinking. I slowed down and pretended to check my backpack, acting like I needed to adjust something. I hoped that maybe she would understand that I didn't want to get close and that she would just walk away or step out and show that everything was normal. When I finally lifted my head again, she was gone. Not walking down the trail, not stepping into the open, just gone. One moment she had been there, and in the next she wasn't. I had only looked away for a second or two. There was no sound of footsteps, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just silence again. My throat felt dry. I stood there longer than I probably should have, listening hard for anything. A twig snapping, leaves shifting, anything that would explain where she went. But the woods remained silent, too silent, and the quiet started to feel like it was pressing against my ears. I told myself she probably cut into the trees and took some side path, or maybe she crouched down, or maybe she wasn't even watching me and I just misread the situation. I pushed myself to keep walking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was behind me. Every few steps I turned slightly, pretending I was just checking the scenery, but really I was trying to catch any movement in the corner of my eye. The path behind me stayed empty, but I still felt watched. 20 minutes later, I reached the clearing near the end of the trail. It was a small open area with a patch of low grass and a few scattered stones. I always liked that spot because the trees opened up enough for the sky to feel bigger, and you could finally see beyond the tight walls of forest. Usually I would stop there for a minute to take a breath before finishing the last part of the hike, but this time something made me turn around immediately. The narrow trail stretched behind me in a straight line for a few seconds before curving back into the trees. And right there, Standing at the edge where the woods swallowed the path was the same woman. Same clothes, same stance, same half-hidden posture, except now she stood fully out in the open, just at the border between sunlight and shadow. It was like she had followed me the entire time, but somehow stayed out of sight until she wanted me to see her. My whole body went cold. I didn't even try to act normal this time. I didn't freeze, didn't pretend to reorganize my backpack, didn't try to understand what she was doing. I felt something primal kick in, something that told me to get out of there as fast as I could without looking back again. I started jogging across the clearing, not too fast at first because I didn't want to slip on wet leaves, but fast enough that my breathing quickly turned sharp. My heart hammered so hard it felt like it was shaking my chest. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, but all I heard was the sound of my own feet pounding the ground. When I reached the gravel lot, I didn't bother looking around. I threw my backpack into the passenger seat, slammed the door, and locked the car before I even sat down properly. My hands shook as I tried to get the keys into the ignition. When the engine finally started, I pulled out of that lot so quickly that the gravel kicked up behind me. I looked in my rearview mirror only once. The trail entrance looked completely empty, but that didn't make me feel any better. The fear didn't hit all at once. It came slowly as I drove, spreading through me like a cold wave. What scared me wasn't just seeing her twice. It was the silence each time, the lack of any sound when she moved, the way she never showed emotion, never shifted, never reacted, the way she vanished the moment I looked away. I kept replaying the moments in my mind, how close she had been, how easy it would have been for her to step onto the trail behind me, just far enough that I wouldn't notice her walking. I didn't want to think about how long she could have been watching me before I even saw her the first time. The idea crept in slowly. Maybe she knew the trail better than I did. Maybe she knew every corner, every tree, every place to step where the leaves wouldn't make sound. Maybe she moved through the woods the way some people move through their own homes. I got home still shaking. I sat in my parked car for several minutes because I didn't trust my legs not to give out under me. Even after I finally went inside, locked the door, and sat on my couch, my mind kept flashing back to her standing at the edge of the trees. Not running, not chasing, just watching, like she didn't need to get close to make me afraid. I knew one thing clearly by the end of that day. I had hiked that trail dozens of times without ever seeing another person out there, especially not in late autumn. But now I couldn't stop thinking about how many times someone could have been there without me noticing. How many times someone could have been standing behind a tree, just out of sight, waiting for me to walk past. I never hiked that trail alone again. I don't think I ever will. Even now, when I think about going back, my chest tightens in the same slow, heavy way it did that day. There was nothing supernatural about what I saw. It was just a woman standing in the woods. But the way she moved, the way she disappeared, the way she reappeared without a single sound, that was enough to stay with me. Because there are people out there who know how to move through places without being heard. People who know how to watch without being seen. And sometimes you only notice them when they choose to let you. I went out for a solo hike that afternoon thinking it would be like any of my other hikes. I had done many trails alone before, and I usually liked the quiet that came with walking deep into the woods without anyone else around. The air was cool. The trees held the soft smell of pine and dirt, and the ground felt dry under my boots. Everything seemed normal when I started, and I didn't feel even a hint of worry. I had my pack, water, a small flashlight, and the map I thought I understood perfectly. The trail began in the open but quickly closed into a narrow path lined with trees that leaned toward each other like they were trying to touch. The deeper I went, the less sunlight reached the ground. I could still see fine, but that dim, late afternoon lighting made everything look a little different. A little older, a little quieter, almost like the woods were preparing for night earlier than usual. I didn't think much of it. I just kept walking at an easy pace. After about an hour, I reached a fork in the trail. The sign was old, the paint faded, and the arrow pointing left was almost gone. Just a thin line that looked like it had been scraped by weather over the years. I pulled out my map, checked it for a second, and convinced myself the left path was the right one. Nothing about it looked wrong. It was narrow but visible, the ground packed down enough that it had clearly been used. I stepped onto it without hesitation. 20 minutes later, I started to notice small things that didn't feel right. The ground looked less worn. The branches leaned lower than they should. I saw patches of moss that usually grew off-trail, not on it. But I kept walking because the path still existed, even if it felt odd. The further I went, the more it twisted in ways the official trail maps never showed. I kept glancing behind me to make sure I could still see where I came from, but the forest swallowed the path so quickly that the trail behind me faded into the trees. After a while, it felt like I was just walking into a darker part of the woods that didn't want to lead anywhere. By then, the sky had started losing color. The air felt heavier. I finally stopped and admitted to myself that I had misread the fork. I had taken the wrong path. I wasn't panicking yet, but the growing dimness made my chest feel tight. I turned around and tried to retrace my steps, but everything looked different in the half-light. Every tree looked the same. Every bend in the trail looked like something I had already passed. I walked faster, hoping the path would widen or open into something familiar. Instead, the woods grew even thicker. After a few minutes of walking in circles, I realized I wasn't on any trail anymore. I was just moving through uneven ground, stepping over roots and sliding through narrow gaps between bushes. I could feel the woods getting darker with every minute. My breathing got faster even though I tried to stay calm. That was when I saw something through the trees. Straight lines instead of natural shapes, hard edges instead of branches. A structure. At first it didn't look like much, just a shape tucked between tall, dark trees. But as I walked closer, the outline became clearer. It was a small wooden cabin. The wood was gray and dry, the boards curled at the edges from years of weather. The cabin looked old, not ruined, but abandoned. The windows were boarded up with mismatched pieces of wood, some nailed sloppy, some placed at angles that didn't line up. It didn't look lived in at all. There was no chimney smoke, no sound, no footprints that I could see from where I stood. Still, I walked up to the front door because I didn't have many choices. It was getting darker by the minute, and I didn't want to spend the night wandering around the woods alone. I raised my hand and knocked. I waited. I listened. Nothing moved inside. No steps, no voices, no shift of wood. The silence around the cabin felt deeper than the silence in the woods. It was the kind of stillness that made me suddenly aware of every tiny sound I made. The soft creak of my backpack, the faint crackle of leaves under my boots, the small sound of my own breathing. I knocked again. Still nothing. I walked around the side of the cabin to see if there was a number on it or some kind of sign telling me who owned it. The walls were rough and splintered, and the boards covering the windows were cracked. I couldn't see a single object outside the cabin. No tools, no chairs, nothing that suggested someone lived there. It just sat there quietly like the woods had grown around it over time. When I rounded the back, my heart froze in my chest. Right next to the door on the backside of the cabin was a fresh boot print in the mud. So fresh that the edges were sharp and clean, like someone had stepped there not long before I arrived. The mud was wet and dark, like it had been stepped on after recent rainfall. Next to that boot print was another one, facing the opposite direction, angled slightly toward the trees. It looked exactly like someone had been standing there watching the woods, maybe listening, maybe waiting. The sight of those prints made my stomach twist. I didn't hear anyone. I didn't see anyone. But those prints meant someone had been there very recently. Someone standing still long enough to leave two solid impressions. Someone close enough that they could have been inside the cabin when I knocked. I called out again, louder this time. The woods answered with more silence. No movement. No signs of life. I didn't want to stay there any longer. I didn't want to wait for whoever left those prints to come back around the corner. My instincts pushed me away from the cabin so fast it felt like my body was moving before my mind made the choice. I backed away first, watching the trees, watching the corners of the cabin, watching every space where someone could step out. Then I turned and started walking quickly through the trees, just trying to put distance between me and that place. My breathing was uneven, and the flashlight in my pack felt suddenly essential, but I didn't want to stop and pull it out. I didn't want to stop at all. For 10 minutes I moved like that, fast, focused, trying to follow the faintest traces of old trail, hoping the ground would shift back into something familiar. The woods around me kept darkening. The branches blurred together. Every shadow looked like someone standing still. At one point, I couldn't help myself. I turned around. In the fading light, far back near where the cabin stood, a shape stood at the edge of the trees. Person, upright, still, facing my direction. They were too far to see clearly, too far to make out clothing or features. Just a dark figure in the dim woods, perfectly still, watching. They didn't move forward. They didn't step back. They just stood there in the exact way someone might if they were making sure I didn't come back. I didn't look a second time. I forced myself to turn and walk faster, focusing only on the ground in front of me, forcing my thoughts to stay on moving forward instead of imagining what that person was doing or why they were standing there. Eventually, after what felt like an hour but was probably much less, I saw something familiar. A trail marker leaning against a rock. The real trail, the one I should have taken at the fork. Relief rushed through me so suddenly that I felt dizzy. I followed the path back toward the entrance, letting the familiar landmarks guide me out of the woods. By the time I made it to my car, it was fully dark, and the cold night air made my hands shake as I tried to unlock the door. I sat inside for a long minute before starting the engine. Even as I drove away, my thoughts stayed back in those woods. The small cabin, the boarded windows, the fresh footprints behind it, the person standing at the edge of the trees watching me leave. I still think about that cabin more than I should. I still wonder who left those prints. I still wonder if someone was inside when I knocked, listening quietly, not wanting to answer. And the part that bothers me the most, the part that sticks with me late at night, is the thought that maybe they had been watching the whole time. Watching as I walked up, watching as I circled their cabin, watching as I stood there, completely unaware. I wasn't alone out there, even if I thought I was. And I don't think I ever will forget the moment I realized it. I was hiking in the Rockies with two friends on a cool late summer morning. The kind of morning where the air feels sharp and clean, and the sky looks almost too blue to be real. We had driven up early to beat the heat and the crowds, and by the time we started the trail, the sun was still low behind the mountain ridges. Everything looked fresh and bright, with long shadows stretching between the pines. The trail wasn't too steep at first, just a slow climb through thick woods. The ground was covered with pine needles and small rocks, and every few seconds the branches above us would creak in the breeze. We weren't rushing. We walked at an easy pace, letting our bodies wake up while we moved deeper into the quiet parts of the forest. The air smelled like sap, dirt, and cold stone, that clean mountain smell that you only get at higher elevations. The deeper we went, the thicker the woods became. Some areas barely let in any sunlight, and the temperature dropped enough that I could feel it through my sleeves. My boots crunched over sticks and dead leaves, and every now and then a bird would dart across the trail. The whole place felt calm and open in a way that made me forget how dangerous the Rockies could be when you weren't paying attention. At one point, the trail narrowed enough that we had to walk single file. The trees leaned in close on both sides, and fallen branches covered the path like a messy scatter of brown and gray bones. I remember thinking it didn't look like much, just typical forest debris. I stepped over a few broken sticks, brushed aside some low branches, and kept moving. Then I saw what looked like a thick fallen branch lying half-buried under a layer of leaves and dirt. It was stretched across the trail at a slight angle, dark in color, and shaped exactly like a branch that had fallen off a tree and dried out over time. Nothing about it stood out. There were dozens of similar pieces of wood all around us. I didn't slow down. I didn't study it. I didn't feel any sense of danger. My boot just lifted like normal and started to swing forward to step over it. The moment my foot touched the branch, everything changed. Instead of feeling the solid, rough texture of wood under my boot, I felt something soft and tense suddenly shift. It whipped around so fast that I didn't even process what I was seeing at first. The dark shape coiled and twisted like it was exploding with movement. I heard a dry, violent rustle, the kind of sound that instantly tells your brain that something is alive and angry. It wasn't a branch at all. It was a rattlesnake, And not a small one. This thing was thick, heavy, and long enough that I still don't understand how I mistook it for a piece of wood. Before my brain fully caught up with what my eyes were seeing, the snake launched upward at the exact spot where my leg had been a second earlier. I felt the air move around my ankle. I felt the sudden panic rise so fast it made my chest burn. My body reacted before my mind did. I jerked backward so hard I lost my balance, and my foot slipped on the loose dirt. I fell straight onto my back, and the weight of my backpack slammed into the ground so hard it knocked the breath out of me. The rattle started almost instantly. Not a quiet rattle, not the kind you hear from far away or imagine from videos. This one was sharp, violent, and loud enough that it felt like it was shaking inside my head. It was coming from just a few feet in front of me. It was a sound that left no room for doubt or hesitation. That sound meant one thing. The snake was ready to strike again. My friends froze. I could feel them above me, not moving, not stepping forward, just staying perfectly still like their bodies had locked up. I didn't blame them. I couldn't even move myself for a few seconds. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it was trying to get out of my chest. My hands shook as I tried to push myself up, but I didn't dare make a big sudden movement. The snake coiled tightly, its body tense, its head raised slightly. The rattle kept going at a rapid, steady rhythm that made my entire spine feel like it was being scraped with something metallic. Its scales blended perfectly with the brown forest floor, and if it hadn't moved, I never would have noticed it at all. The idea that I had actually put my foot on top of it hit me like another wave of shock. The only thing that kept me from fully panicking was the fact that the snake hadn't actually struck me. Could have. It was close enough, but somehow it missed. We slowly began backing away. Every inch felt like a mile, like moving through water. I could feel the strain in my legs as I pushed myself backward with tiny, almost invisible steps. I kept my eyes locked on the snake the entire time, watching every twitch of its body, every shift of its coils. I didn't want to blink. I didn't want to give it a chance to move again without me noticing. Eventually, after what felt like 5 full minutes but was probably just 30 seconds, the rattle slowed. The snake finally lowered its head, turned its body, and slithered into the brush beside the trail. Even then, we didn't move at first. We kept staring at the spot where it disappeared, waiting to see if it would come back out. Only after the sound faded completely did we step fully away and put distance between ourselves and that patch of ground. The hike back felt like it lasted forever. Every stick on the ground looked like a snake. Every twisted root looked dangerous. I kept scanning the trail ahead of me, then the ground near my feet, then the bushes beside me, repeating that pattern over and over. The adrenaline wore off slowly, leaving my legs feeling drained and shaky. My backpack straps felt heavier. My breathing stayed tight, like I couldn't fully relax until I reached the car. Even when we made it back to the trailhead, I still couldn't get the image out of my mind. The shape of the snake twisted on the ground, the way it reacted instantly to my foot, the way it lunged so fast I barely even saw the movement. But the part that haunted me the most came later. I kept thinking about how easy it is to miss something deadly in the woods. How something that could kill you can blend perfectly into the ground you walk on without a second thought. I had stepped over countless branches that morning. That one just happened to be alive. The idea that my foot had actually been right on top of a rattlesnake without me realizing it made my stomach twist every time I thought about it. At night, when everything was quiet and my mind had nothing else to focus on, I would replay that moment in slow motion. The feel of the snake shifting under my boot, the sudden explosion of movement, the sound of the rattle blasting through the air. I knew how different that day could have ended. I knew how close I had come to something I never want to experience again. That hike changed the way I moved through the woods. I watch the ground more carefully now. I take my time stepping over anything that looks even slightly out of place. I know how stupid it sounds to be haunted by a moment that lasted only a second or two, but that's all it takes out there. A second is enough, and I still think about it sometimes. How one wrong step in the Rockies almost turned into something much worse, and how I will always remember the feeling of having my foot on top of a rattlesnake before I even knew it was there. My cousin and I had been planning that overnight hike for weeks. The The forecast looked good, the trail wasn't too crowded that time of year, and both of us liked the idea of camping somewhere quiet where we wouldn't hear anything except wind and our own footsteps. We hiked near an old fire road that cut straight through a long valley. One of those places that feels empty even during the day, like the whole landscape has been paused. The road itself had been closed for years, but the ground around it was still flat and easy to follow. We started late, later than we should have, pushing into the valley when the sun was already fading behind the ridge. The air was cool, and the shadows stretched long across the ground, swallowing the trail before we even reached our campsite. There was no sound except for our boots crunching gravel and the low rustle of dry grass swaying against the wind. Every step deeper into the valley made the world feel larger and quieter at the same time. By the time we reached a spot flat enough to camp, it was already close to midnight. We were tired, not talking much, just trying to get everything set up quickly. We pitched the tent near a cluster of bushes that gave us a little bit of cover. The fire road was only a few dozen yards away, a pale gray line cutting through the dark grass. The night air felt heavier than usual, like the valley held onto cold differently. When we crawled into the tent, I could feel the temperature drop even more. My cousin fell asleep first. I lay awake longer, listening to the soft hum of insects and the faint wind slipping down from the higher ridges. The stars above the tent were bright when I last looked at them, but inside everything was pitch black except for the slight glow of my watch. Around 2 a.m., I snapped awake without knowing why. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a noise inside the tent. It was something outside, something distant but sharp enough to pull me right out of sleep. First, it sounded like an animal far down the valley. A long, drawn-out sound, rough and uneven, like something in pain. I heard it again a few seconds later. This time it carried better across the valley floor. A drawn-out scream that didn't rise or fall, just stretched, like a long strand of sound being pulled tight. My cousin sat up too. We both froze and listened. The sound came again, and this time it didn't sound like an animal anymore. The tone shifted. The pitch changed. It sounded like a person yelling words we couldn't understand, or maybe not actual words at all. Just raw panic thrown into the night air. We stayed completely still for a moment, our breathing shallow, trying to figure out how far away the noise was. It echoed across the valley walls, bouncing between the ridges in a way that made it impossible to measure the distance. But it didn't sound close enough to be an immediate threat. It sounded like it came from somewhere deep along the old fire road. We didn't want to ignore it. Everything in our bodies felt tense and alert. We grabbed our flashlights and unzipped the tent. The cold slapped us in the face the second we stepped outside. The valley looked huge in the dark, trees and hills blending into one heavy black shape. We climbed up a nearby ridge because we thought we might see something from higher ground. Maybe a light, maybe a figure, something to explain who was screaming and why. But the moment we reached the top and shined our lights down into the valley, the screaming stopped. Not faded, not moved, stopped, like someone had hit a switch. The woods below us went so silent it felt wrong. Even the insects, which had been chirping earlier, were gone. We stood there with our flashlights raised, scanning the valley floor, sweeping the beam back and forth over empty grass and scattered trees. The only sound was the distant wind brushing past the tops of the pines. We waited, maybe a minute, maybe more. Our arms got tired from holding the lights up, but neither of us wanted to lower them. Then, without any warning, the screaming started again. But this time it wasn't coming from down the valley. It came from behind us, the exact opposite direction. Close enough that the sound hit the air sharp and loud, echoing through the trees behind our camp. My entire body went cold. The shift in direction didn't make sense. It sounded like the same voice, the same harsh panic, the same strange tone, but now it was coming from the ridgeline we had just climbed. We spun around with the flashlights, the beams shaking hard in our hands. The ridge behind us was steep and crowded with thick trees. The light didn't reach far. All we saw were shadows layered on top of shadows, the trunks of trees rising like pillars into darkness. The screaming didn't continue. It hit once, then cut off completely, leaving the woods silent again. That silence felt worse than the noise. We didn't say anything. We didn't debate. Our bodies worked faster than our thoughts. We ran back down the ridge, grabbed our gear, stuffed everything into our packs with messy hands and shaking fingers. Normally breaking camp takes 10 minutes at least. That night it took under 2. We didn't care how anything was packed. We just wanted to leave that valley before the sound came again, before we found out what had made it or why it moved the way it did. The hike out was the longest, most stressful 3 hours of my life. The trail in front of us kept bending into darkness, the trees leaning over us like they were trying to hide whatever might be inside them. Our flashlights shook the whole time, creating jittery movements in the shadows that made us jump at things that weren't even there. Every time a twig broke under our boots, the sound bounced across the valley like it was warning something out there of our location. Nothing followed us. Nothing appeared on the trail behind us. But the sense of being watched never left. The screaming didn't return, but that almost made it worse. Whatever made the noise had moved behind us once, and we didn't know if it had stopped there or if it had been pacing us quietly as we hiked out. When we finally reached the trailhead, the sky was a pale gray, just starting to lighten. My legs felt heavy, my heartbeat still uneven. We didn't talk on the drive back. We just stared out the windows, letting the road take us farther from that valley. Later, when we told the rangers what happened, they listened carefully. They told us mountain lions sometimes mimic distress sounds, especially young ones. Sometimes they sound like crying children, sometimes like a person in trouble. They said the echo inside a valley can make it sound like the noise is moving when it isn't. They said it was probably just a big cat hunting or calling out. But the thing is, what we heard didn't sound like a mountain lion at all. It didn't have that wild edge. It didn't have that animal tone. It sounded like a grown man. A man yelling for help, then yelling again from somewhere impossible. Maybe it was just the echo playing tricks on us. Maybe the darkness made everything worse. Maybe fear twisted a normal sound into something else. But even now, when I think about that night, I remember how fast the direction changed. How suddenly the screaming appeared behind us. How it felt like something out there knew exactly where we were. And I still don't know what disturbed me more, the sound itself or the fact that the moment we climbed that ridge to look for it, it went completely silent, like it was watching us and waiting for us to react. I had been planning that section of the Appalachian Trail for months. Nothing extreme, nothing that required special gear or training. Just a slow, steady 3-day walk through a stretch that most hikers described as peaceful and straightforward. I wanted the quiet, the space, the steady rhythm of walking through an endless corridor of trees. I wanted something that made me feel like I had stepped away from everything for a few days. The first 2 days were exactly what I hoped for. Cool mornings, long afternoons where the sun filtered through the leaves in that soft, golden way that makes the woods look almost harmless. I stopped often, sometimes to rest, sometimes just to breathe and take in the calm. I didn't see many people. A couple of hikers passed me the first day, another small group the second day, but mostly I was alone in long stretches of trail that felt untouched. On the morning of the third day, everything shifted, though I didn't realize how serious it was at first. I remembered waking up early, packing my small camp, and getting on the trail before the sun had fully risen. The air felt cold in that way the mountains always get just before dawn. The trail was sloped and rocky, weaving around ridges and pockets of thick forest. Around mid-morning, I stopped to drink water and check my map. I felt completely relaxed, completely safe. Then I noticed something behind me on a ridge, maybe 60 or 70 yards away. A man was standing there. He wasn't dressed like a hiker. He wore jeans, a black hoodie, and no backpack. No water bottle. Nothing that made sense for being that deep on the trail. At first I assumed he had cut through from some nearby road or cabin. People sometimes used pieces of the trail as shortcuts, but something about him didn't fit. He stood still, facing directly toward me. His posture was straight, almost stiff. I tried to ignore him and kept walking, but after a few minutes, something made me look back again. He was still there. Same distance, same ridge, slightly lower now because the trail dipped, but still facing me with that same unmoving stance. I didn't know what to think. Maybe he was just heading the same direction. Maybe he was planning to turn off soon. I told myself to stay calm. I kept walking. 10 minutes later, I stopped to adjust my boots. When I stopped, the woods behind me stopped too. There were no footsteps, no crunch of leaves, no movement, just silence. I tied my boots slower than necessary, trying to listen, trying to see through the trees without fully turning around. The silence made everything feel too tight, too close. I started walking again. A few minutes passed before I checked behind me again. He was still there. Same distance, same pace, same steady, fixed posture. It was like he was using me as a marker, never getting closer or farther, just matching all my stops and starts. I felt my chest start to tighten in that slow, creeping way where the fear doesn't fully show itself, but you can feel it gathering behind your ribs. The trail didn't have many places to hide. It was narrow in most sections with dense woods on both sides and occasional rocks and gaps. I kept walking, trying not to think too much about it, but the feeling stayed. I decided to stop again. This time it was on purpose. I ducked behind a large rock formation, pretending to check the straps on my pack. I crouched lower than necessary, letting the rock block his view. My plan was simple. I wanted to see if he would keep walking or if he would change distance. I tightened the straps slowly, breathing steadily, listening. Leaves shifted. A single, deliberate step, then another. When I stepped out from behind the rock, he had closed the distance by nearly half. He was no longer 60 or 70 yards away. He was maybe 30 yards away, standing in the middle of the trail, completely still, facing directly toward me. No expression, no blinking, no movement except the slightest rise and fall of breathing. It didn't make sense. If he wanted help, he would have said something. If he was lost, he would have waved or made some sign. If he was hiking, he would have had gear. And if he was just cutting through, he had no reason to follow my exact pace for almost an hour. I felt something cold run down my spine. A survival instinct, something deeper than regular fear. Something that told me to move, to go, to get away from him as fast as I could without breaking into a panicked run. I pretended not to notice him. I didn't want to show fear. I didn't want to make him react. I just put my head down and started walking with long, steady steps. But inside, everything was shaking. The trail opened into a wider path, and for the first time in a long while I could pick up more speed. I walked faster than I ever had with a pack on my back, letting the trail pull me downhill and around bends. I didn't look back. I didn't listen. I just moved. My breath came out in hard, uneven bursts, but I kept moving, letting my legs do the thinking. Eventually, I saw a wooden sign up ahead, pointing toward a shelter half a mile away. I aimed for it like it was the only safe thing left in the world. I reached it in what felt like a single breath. There were 8 or 9 other hikers gathered there, eating, resting, talking quietly. The sight of them hit me with a wave of relief so strong I almost felt weak. I sat down on a log, trying to look normal while my body was still trembling. I kept glancing toward the direction I came from. The woods behind the shelter looked still. Nothing moved. No figure stepped out of the trees. No sound followed me. It was like he had melted away into the forest as soon as he knew I wasn't alone. Later, one of the other hikers noticed how shaken I looked. He didn't ask many questions, but he made a passing comment that stuck with me. He mentioned that he'd hiked the same section the year before and had seen a man dressed in dark clothes who followed him for nearly half a day. Same distance, same frozen posture, same refusal to speak or come closer. He never saw where the man went either, just disappeared once more people were around. That night I barely slept. Every rustle of leaves near the shelter made my skin crawl. Every distant step or shift of wind sounded like someone walking up the trail. Even with the others around, the woods felt different, like something had been stirred up that didn't quite settle again. The next morning, I stayed with the group. I didn't want to be alone on the trail. I didn't want to give that man any chance to appear again. We hiked together for several miles before the trail split off. Even when I was finally back at my car later that day, I kept checking the parking area, the tree line, the trailhead. I drove away fast, and I didn't relax until I was miles down the road. The The thing that stays with me isn't that he followed me. Hikers pass each other all the time out there. People cut through. People wander. But the way he moved, the way he kept that exact distance, the way he didn't speak, the way he closed in only when I couldn't see him, that's what I can't forget. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He wasn't hiking. He was watching. He was tracking me. He was waiting for something I don't want to imagine. And the worst part is knowing this, he didn't stop because of me. He stopped because other people were there. Somewhere on that trail, in those miles of deep woods, that man is still out there. And he isn't hiking the Appalachian Trail. He's walking it for a different reason. I finished my trip, but I haven't returned alone since. I don't think I ever will.